Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry for the delay. Let's see if we can move now. We're working. First, I'm Cornelia Rooks, and I'd like to introduce myself and my company. I have been with Registrar Corp since 2006. I currently serve as Senior Regulatory Specialist Advisor with RC with Registrar Corp. I helped establish the medical programs that have supported Registrar Corp's growth into the organization it is today. I started my career with the U.S. government at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital. From there, I went to FDA as a scientific reviewer and inspector with Center for Biologics and Evaluation and Research, followed by a stint with the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and finally with the Center of Devices and Radiological Health. Within the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, I held several positions as scientific reviewer, branch chief executive, secretary of advisory panels, and division director. Okay, today's agenda, I'd like to briefly introduce our, our FDA as well as our company, followed by ports of entry within the U.S., import process, detention, notices of action, and lastly, a review of our services before opening up to questions and answers. Registrar Corp was founded in 2003 after the passage of the U.S. Bioterrorism Act. Registrar Corp has helped over 32,000 clients across 190 plus countries and has regulatory expertise across the globe. With 18 offices worldwide providing 27 services and software packages, we provide support to multiple industries, including pharmaceuticals, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, biologics, food and beverages, um, dietary supplements, radiation emitting devices. My slides don't seem to be moving forward. Okay. Let's try. Well, it seems to be hung up for what? So let's move on, even though I'm unable to move my slides forward. We'll try shortly to see if we can get it to do that. Okay, the FDA's mission is to protect public health by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and security of food products, human and veterinary drugs, blood products, biologics, and vaccines, cosmetics, medical devices, as well as tobacco products and products that emit radiation. The FDA achieves this by enforcing federal laws and regulations governing these products, and by providing a science-based information to consumers and patients. The regulations for the products FDA regulations are found in 21 Title 21 of the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, or as we call it, the CFR. Next, I'd like to take a look at where the products come into the United States. There are 328 ports of entry in the U.S., which include land, air, and sea ports. The FDA import program handles products at ports of entry, which is managed by several regional import offices, Division of Northeast Imports, DNEI, the Division of Northern Border Imports, DNBI, the Division of Southeast Imports, DSEI, and the Division of West Coast Imports, DWCI, as well as others. The specific office responsible depends on the port's location, and for general inquiries or entry status, you can use tools like ITACS, which is Import Trade Auxiliary Communication System, which is an FDA online tool designed to streamline communication between importers and the FDA, allowing the faster processing of import documents. We'll begin with a few definitions for the players in the process. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, of CBP for short, is the federal agency that has jurisdiction over all commercial entities coming into the United States. Formal shipments will come in under a customs bond. FDA has inspectors and compliance officers assigned to the individual ports, as I just explained, and they will have jurisdiction over any commercial entries containing products regulated by FDA. All commercial entries will be filed by a customs broker who has been licensed by CBP to perform this duty. On the industry side, generally speaking, every shipment will involve the manufacturer and possibly an additional entity acting as an exporter. Okay, let's see if my slides are moving forward again. Um, if not, we will proceed. No. Okay, so let's move on to the entry submission. All products, as I stated before, all the products come in through the ports. When they enter, the entry review will start based on the file entry documents such as customs forms, invoices, bills of lading, other information such as in-use letter, product labeling, certificates. Products will then undergo an automatic electronic review, as I stated, which we will discuss later. It is important to understand that all FDA-regulated and imported products must meet the same standards as domestic products and are subject to FDA review. FDA determines admissibility and may refuse entry to products that violate or appear to violate FDA laws. So when an exporter ships products to the U.S. importer, an entry is filed by the customs broker with CBP, which is again Customs and Border Protection. They review the entry, usually electronically, and will alert FDA. If FDA regulated products are present, FDA will then review the entry using a system they call PREDICT, which stands for Predictive Risk-Based Evaluation for Dynamic Import Compliance Targeting, which assesses the risk level of the products in the shipment. More about this later. FDA will then select the the certain product that they are interested in and will either review or they will sample if those conditions exist for sampling. We will now review the steps to import product into the U.S. Let's see what happens when a product comes in. We will discuss what should be done to prepare to import a product, the product's entry submission, how it is reviewed upon receipt in the U.S., possible examination and sampling, and then a compliance review. The importer who has the legal responsibilities for the products they are importing can hire a customs broker that is licensed to prepare the documentation for commercial entry with CBP. The importer should ensure ahead of time that products comply with the appropriate regulations. They must collect information about the manufacturer and all applicable requirements to include establishment registration and listing information with current information on file with FDA, compliant labeling, and if applicable, pre-market notification or 510K clearance, or pre-market approvals or PMA, as we would say, approvals. Additionally, the importer should also review any import problems, for example, import alerts or detentions without physical examination, which we will review later. Any filer, including the importer or customs broker, can upload documents into a secure system called Import Trade Auxiliary Communications Systems, or ITIS for short. This will allow faster processing, tracking of the entries, as well as availability information if FDA selects a shipment for examination. When FDA staff assesses admissibility of a shipment, they use tools like Predict and internal databases to determine if the product should be held for inspection or sampling. They may also use information from the federal agencies, federal governments, or public sources in this process. They will consider a number of different factors. Chief among them is the compliance history of the manufacturer. Manufacturers with a history of sending non-compliant products, also called violative, will have a much greater chance of being held for inspection. Same with manufacturers, importers, and exporters who had previous refusals, recalls, failed inspections, or warning letters issued to them. Also, products with an inherently higher risk, such as certain lasers, must meet specific radiation safety standards and reporting requirements, as well as those products that are from a category of products that historically have presented issues upon entry. Certain countries present a higher risk, sometimes generally, but also situational. FDA can consider geopolitical events and public health crises. For example, after the nuclear incident in Japan in 2011, FDA stopped shipments of certain products from that area for a period of time. And like many instances in life, improper paperwork can complicate things unnecessarily if the entry paperwork is inaccurate or not complete. Okay, so let's see if we're advancing now. So let's move on to where we were. Okay. So the next slide goes on to say, because technological capabilities have advanced significantly, the July 9th, 2025 CBP update stated that all entries of FDA regulated products must be reviewed by FDA regardless of their quantity or value. How does FDA verify compliance with the medical devices? The entry reviewers will review the information provided to the FDA in the importer's entry transmission compared to FDA's internal data system. To expedite the entry process, it is imperative to ensure that the entry data is correct and accurate to include relevant AFC codes, which are affirmation of compliance. A three-letter code used to confirm that a product meets specific FDA requirements, such as registration or approval numbers. This code helps expedite the FDA's review process for imports by providing a quick way for the agency to verify compliance. This will increase the likelihood that the shipment will be processed electronically and not held for manual. Declared manufacturer, there should be a declared importer or consignee, product description. E, the FDA uses its internal data system to verify registration, listing, device approval when required, or other product requirements, and to determine if the firm is subject to detention without physical examination. We'll hear more about those later. If the information submitted matches the compliance, is verified. If the information submitted does not match, the FDA may gather additional information and may detain the product. Predict can verify the declared information against FDA's internal data systems. Noted. Submitting incorrect or incomplete information may delay the review of your entry. And predict. FDA receives notifications through the ACEs. With the notification, a screening is done by a system called predict, or predictive risk-based evaluation with dynamic import compliance target. This tool is FDA uses to electronically screen all regulated shipments imported or offered for import into the United States. Predict assigns a risk score and flags high risk shipments as well as low risk with missing or incorrect data for further review. What happens when the shipment is flagged? So what actually happens is that FDA decides that they want to inspect the shipment and or take a sample, they issue a hold or a detention. The importer or consignee must not distribute the product or risk violating the bond. If the bond is violated, the importer may have to pay a penalty 3 times the value of the shipment. An FDA inspector will perform a physical examination and may take a sample of the product with them for additional inspection or testing. Depending on the concern, they may subject it to increased scrutiny or send it to a lab for analysis. For example, if they suspect illegal or undeclared colors, or if they suspect that the product is adulterated in any way, they will then send it off for lab analysis. If they find no violations, then they will release the product and compensate the importer for the value of the sample. If they do find violations, they will detain the product. Examination and sampling. Once FDA receives the predict analyzed results, they may decide to, again, as I stated, physically examine and possibly sample the shipment. The reason, as I stated previously, is It depends on a number of things. Again, the product type, the hazards, as well as any other information FDA may gather during their review process. Physical exam and product sample. If examined, the products may be released with no further review or sampling. However, if the samples are taken, the product will not be released until the lab results are reviewed. This process may take a while based on the number of factors, product type, or testing and FDA workload. The compliance branch will evaluate the evidence obtained from documentation, physical inspections, and/or laboratory test results to determine whether the product is in violation of FDA laws. What is a conditional release? Well, sometimes FDA does a conditional release of the product. For FDA regulated products, including medical devices, the term conditional release refers to a period during which the device is released from CBP custody, but remains subject to the conditions of the CBP importation bond pending a final admissibility determination by FDA. The initial conditional release period is typically 30 days. FDA action. During this time, the FDA reviews the entry to ensuring compliance with relevant laws and regulations. The FDA may decide to sample examine the product redelivery if the FDA determines the product is not admissible. It is found to be non-compliant with FDA requirements. It can notify CBP, which will then demand the redelivery of the product to customs custody. Extension. The FDA can extend this conditional release period by issuing a notice of sampling, detention, or other action within the initial 30 days. Now we will talk about notices of action, and we will see some examples. How will I track what is happening to my shipment? Well, you will use FDA's iTax system to follow it electronically, as well as FDA will issue if there's any kind of action that is taken on your product. FDA will issue a notice of action. So when they hold the product, an NOA is issued. When they sample the product, an NOA is issued. When they detain the product, an NOA is issued. However, NOAs are sent to the importer or their consignee and the customs broker, exporters, and manufacturers do not receive NOAs directly, but must rely on the importer to provide them. So strong communication between exporters and importers is crucial to ensure timely responses. If detained, the NOAs will give the exact violations and reference the applicable part of the FD&C Act, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Also, as they do not recognize the exporter or manufacturer having legal rights to the shipment in this context, FDA will only accept communications from the importer, customs broker, or an agent designated by the importer. Very important to know that the NOA provides a response date by which the importer must respond to the charges. And a failure to respond by deadline may result in an FDA refusal of entry, even if the products are actually compliant. You've missed your chance to prove it. And so FDA broadly prohibits the introduction of adulterated or misbranded products into interstate commerce. These terms cover a wide range of specific regulatory violations that lead to detention. The misbranding provisions of the FD&C Act cover various aspects of both drug and device labeling requirements. Many of the provisions apply to drugs and devices both. However, there are specific misbranding provisions that apply only to devices and only to drugs. We'll now discuss the misbranding and adulteration provisions. Why might your product be detained? Let's go through the misbranding that apply to both drugs and are listed here. These misbranding charges are charges of the labeling that is false and misleading. Its packaging does not bear labeling that contains the place of business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. Quantity of contents does not bear adequate directions and warnings for use. It is misbranding is a charge that is common for labeling issues. A shipment with products that bears false and misleading or incomplete labeling, including the label, is not fully translated in English. Packaging is also required to contain the name of the place of business of the manufacturer, packer, and distributor. Another important component that is required on all labels is if the labeling has, particularly for drugs, has a product has terms of weight measure or numerical count. Products that are intended for administration must bear adequate directions for use, unless it is a product that is exempted from such requirements. Misbranding for medical devices specifically. These were provisions that came about later. Um, they applied just for medical devices. A device must include the device's established name and its name in an official companion and or any common or unusual name exemptions may be granted. False and misleading information, restricted devices, manufacturer, packer, or distributor of a restrictive device fails to include all advertisements or other descriptive materials. Distributed without a 510K, does not abide by labeling prescribed in a performance, or there is a failure or refusal to comply with any requirement prescribed under Section 518 of the Act or 519 of the Act. 518 would be notification and other remedies, and 519 would be records and reports on devices. Adulteration is a charge that results from concerns regarding safety of the product. Devices can be charged with adulteration when it is a filtered, putrid, or prepared in conditions that are unsanitary that by default puts the user of the product at risk, especially for devices that are needles or implants. If there are substances on the container or coloring used that might be hazardous to the consumer, the product can be adulterated. If the device is not working within the strength it claims to represent, can lead to ineffective or harm to the consumer, is another reason products are adulterated. When appropriate filings have not been completed for certain types of devices, such as failing to conform to approved FDA and ITEs. So, what are the terms that you will find on a notice of action? You write, you might receive a number of notices of action outlining what the status of one particular product is. Once a notice of action is received, it is very important to determine the status of the product is, and most importantly, what the respond by date will be. So you can see some of these terms on some of the next examples we will see. We will now discuss two different types of products. The first shipment will be adjustable bed and components. And so what you should notice when you first look at the notice is to look at your entry number and the notice number. So this particular entry came in on May 9th, and it's the very first entry. And it consists of, and the next section here down below will give you a summary of its current status. So you can see the line numbers. So there are 3 items on this particular entry, and these are the current status for these 3 entries. You will note that one of the 3, the adjustable bed, is pending further review, while the other 2 were released. So that's page 1 of the notice. On page 2, it tells you the next, I'm sorry, no, in notice number 2, you'll see here, now came out on June 7th, 2023. And that item that was detained now has been released, along with showing that the other 2 lines on this particular entry were released. So this is the second example. Again, please note the entry number and also the notice number and date. We did not obtain notice number 1, so we cannot show that as an example. However, we will assume that it stated what the current status was, that it was to be detained for further review. So now the client did not respond in a timely fashion, so notice number 2 came out. And in this notice, you will see that the current status is that they're both being detained after the notice stated that they were under review. So now they're detained for a number of reasons, which we now will see why. And so remember I talked about misbranding charges. Well, the scooter in this particular detention has several misbranding charges, and the company needs to be aware of specifically what those charges are, because if they want to respond to the notice of action, they can address the misbranding issues. And you will see that the wheelchair also received misbranding charges on page 3, 2, and 3 of notice number 2. So the company may have responded, but the response was not adequate, and notice number 3 was issued. Now we're in November 25th, 2024, and this is notice 3. At this time, the scooter and the wheelchair were both refused entry. And so page 1 shows its status, and page 2 is showing the reason they are refused. And we go back to those misbranding charges that we saw. So maybe they took care of a couple of the misbranding charges, but they did not further respond to the others. And on page 3, you will see here, FDA will explain what the company needs to do now that their product has been refused entry into the U.S. This is an example of medical device with quality and other issues. We have some exam gloves that came through, and these had adulteration charges I'm sorry, let's go back. Adulteration charges as you see here. Now, adult gloves have had a long history of having these adulteration charges for various companies. Generally, there are holes in the gloves. And so import alert 80-04, if you want to look up, will actually show you what that particular import alert addressed and what companies need to do to get off of the import alert. And here is an example of a medical device without UVI, which is, again, one of those misbranding charges because we're talking about labeling issues. And so this product did not have a unique device identifier, and so therefore that product was detained so that the company could respond to that particular product, the being detained. So most common detention issues that are seen are missing information, device listings, manufacturer establishment numbers, um, importer numbers, that sort of thing. It is used when an importer product, I'm sorry, we went ahead. Importer not identifying the manufacturer when registering. Manufacturers not identifying the importer 15K PMA number, labeling and other additional information documents. Once a product has been refused and or hasn't gotten to that place yet, a company can actually put in an application for authorization to relabel or recondition a non-compliant article. The importer of record must submit that document and to respond within a certain amount of time, and they have to give the time frame that it would be needed to complete the reconditioning. So let's say in the case of the UDI example, that company would in fact need to have new labeling or some sort of sticker added to recondition the product so that it would have a UDI label. So, as we have seen, refusal of admission will happen. The importer fails to supply necessary information, specified time frame. FDA will issue a notice of refusal, which means the device is denied entry. Failed efforts to relabel or recondition, reconditioning failures, no Form 766 is submitted, hearing found, and there's a hearing found the charges to be valid, but not all NOA charges have been resolved within the specified time frame. So U.S. Customs CBP will issue a notice of redelivery, requiring the importer to return the goods to customs for export or destruction. This must typically be done within 90 days of having received that refusal notice that you saw. While CBP and FDA supervise the destruction, they do not charge a fee for their oversight. However, the importer may need to pay for storage and for a certified service to destroy the goods, including the transport and handling. So we'll go over what detention without physical examination or import alerts really mean, and why it is important that the importer actually look to see if their exporter or manufacturers have products that fall under a detention without physical examination, which will be an import alert. We've discussed detentions. Now we would like to get into these import alerts. Before shipment even arrives at the port, the product can be at risk when a firm is on import alert. When a firm is on import alert, it will have a high predict score to flag the product for detention without physical examination. What is interesting about import alerts is they do not only apply to companies. It can be based on a product that FDA is aware of, which has an issue or based on a country or region. Import alerts are public information, And this information informs that when shipping to the United States, there is a high risk that the shipment may not proceed. A detention is specific to a shipment. It is not company specific or product specific. A detention is holding that specific shipment at the border because it appears to be in violation of U.S. law. Note that when a shipment is on hold, it is not always automatically detained. A shipment status can be pending review, which we saw in one of our earlier examples. It does not mean it is detained as explained earlier. Once that notice of action is issued with charges, then the shipment is detained and a response for corrective action or plan to help release the shipment may be submitted. Otherwise, violations cannot be resolved and shipment will be denied and either need to be reshipped outside the U.S. or destroyed. We'll now take a look at the key components that make up an individual alert. Each import alert begins with the reason for the alert, which outlines the specific issues that trigger it. With over 150 active alerts, these reasons vary widely, and they can range from safety concerns like adulteration and contamination to misbranded violations such as inappropriate labeling. Next is the guidance for the field staff, which provides FDA personnel with instructions on how to handle shipments and evaluate requests for removal from DWPE. This guidance may include specific testing protocols and may include documentation with specific requirements. The alert also includes product information which officially identifies the types of products in question, along with the relevant charges, with the regulatory basis for why the goods might be considered violative. So, finally, it will include one of these three types of lists: red, yellow, or green, but most commonly either a red list or a green list. A red list identifies firms and products that are subject to automatic detention. Those subject to a red list are generally working towards removal by demonstrating compliance. A green list includes firms that have successfully demonstrated compliance and are therefore excluded from DWPE. For firms affected by these types of import alerts, being added to the green list is the ultimate goal. The yellow list is much less common and affects firms, products, and countries under intensified FDA surveillance due to potential violations. With that foundation in place of what's included on an import alert, let's now dive into the process. The DWPE. Let's start by taking a closer look at the basis for FDA's import alert. Import alerts are issued to notify all U.S. entry ports that certain products from specific regions or manufacturers may be in violation of FDA laws and regulations. These alerts are typically triggered when the FDA identifies a pattern of violations, suggesting that future shipments from the same source may also be non-compliant. A firm or product can be placed on an import alert for several reasons, as we've already talked about earlier. In short, any evidence that future shipments may be violative can lead to a DWPE. It's important to understand that a company doesn't need multiple violations to be listed. Sometimes just one serious issue, especially if it poses the potential risk to U.S. consumers, is enough. Also, there are many types of import alerts, which address a wide range of regulatory concerns, from microbiological contamination to labeling violations. On the next slide, we will take a look at some examples of the kinds of alerts currently in effect. As of now, there are approximately over 150 active import alerts, and all of them are publicly accessible on the FDA database. FDA puts these import alerts due to evidence that they have regarding a company, product, or region, as we talked about. For companies, they are commonly put under import alert due to these issues during inspection that were not resolved. A warning letter that goes unresolved can put a firm on import alert. The most avoidable action a firm can take to avoid the import alert is to never ignore the FDA when they reach out. When FDA contacts you to an issue that may result in a recall, denying an inspection request, or other communication requests, FDA puts firms on an import alert, and it is not easy or a quick process to be removed. Petitions have to be filed, and they require documentation and time for review by FDA. And are the three levels: the red list, the yellow list, and the green list, with some examples of these products and these import alerts that you may be interested in. So going forward with that DWPE process, when an import alert is triggered, it instructs FDA compliance officers to detain certain products without conducting an examination. So as we stated, this does happen on occasion. FDA will then issue a notice, as we saw, which will also specify if that detention is due to an import alert, which we saw in the glove notice of action. And once they are, you have a number of options within that detention period. And once the once the product is put on detention without physical examination, you must go through that process as outlined here before you can get off. What's included in an import alert? Now we'll dive into what a petition to FDA for removal from that entails, which we already talked about. And this is an import alert petition. So the import alert petition should explain what the violation was, its corrective actions, and preventive actions, as well as evidence of sustained compliance. And so here again is a diagram of what one needs to do in order to get a product off. There are steps you can take. You need to understand which import alert your firm is listed. And once you have determined the import alert, then you can review guidance in FDA's regulatory manual about what to do. When you submit a request to FDA, which can be either emailed or mailed directly, you should include a petition, a cover letter, a letter of authorization for who you authorize to speak on your behalf, supporting evidence. Once your petition is sent to FDA, an acknowledgement will be sent out to you, including a case number and an FDA contact person. Note that these filings are processed in order that they are received. Some cases are going to be more complex compared to others. The time frame for response is not only dependent on the volume, but the nature of the problem. It is not an easy process, so keep that in mind when you start to do a petition. Can my shipment be saved? Maybe yes, maybe no. But not all detained shipments can be saved, but quite a few can. Sometimes the manufacturer has forgotten to file or renew their registration with FDA. That can be fixed with the product is being detained while the product is being detained. Once filed, FDA will usually release the product. And same with the prior notice that was inadvertently not filed properly with FDA. for in the case of foods. Sometimes FDA will even allow the products to proceed, as I stated earlier, while they're reviewing, just move through the system while they're reviewing them. So there is also situations where a product is actually compliant and FDA is mistaken and thinking that it is violative. In these cases, you may submit what is called a testimony of admissibility to prove that the goods are compliant. In other cases where FDA suspects adulteration, you may be able to get the product tested by an independent laboratory to prove that the products are not in violation. Some shipments cannot be saved. If FDA takes a sample and either visually or the lab test it finds problems with that particular shipment, also if the product is deemed an unapproved product or does not have a 510K, then it may not be released successfully because it will take quite some time for that to move through. In summary, um, you can seek regulatory expertise from Registrar Corp. A notice of action can be alarming, but in most cases, it can be resolved without further action being taken against your business. How long it takes to resolve depends on how thorough your documentation or the knowledge and experience of your U.S. agent. Without the proper guidance, it is all too easy to submit inadequate or incorrect responses and have your product seized, destroyed, or forced into a recall. Registrar Corp regulatory specialists have helped over 50,000 clients worldwide achieve and maintain compliance with the FDA to help move the products freely and out of detention. So here we have a number of medical device services we offer on an array of products. And you can see this list is pretty extensive. We have an amazing portal that helps communicate changes or confirm that there are no changes when it comes time to renew your submissions with FDA. It is known as the Registrar Hub, and it also encompasses of our other amazing software, Comply Hub, that will alert you if your firm is named on import alert, or simply have a centralized place to review your company's history. We have recently added assistance for Canada, Health Canada for Class 1 devices and medical device establishment licenses. So if you're shipping to the US and Canada or to Canada, contact us and we'll be happy to help. So we have a few moments left to open it up to some questions. If we are unable to accommodate your questions in today's time, please do not hesitate to contact us. I will display our information momentarily, which is the next slide. But I do want to thank all of the people who hung in there throughout this presentation, all through the technical difficulties, but hopefully you were able to learn something new during this presentation. Okay, I have a number of questions that I'm going to try to get to as many as possible in the time allotted. I believe that the presentation will be available, the video of the presentation will be available to you. Okay, my bathroom safety chair bedside mode is considered a class 1 device. Does that mean I don't need to have a UDI? Well, it depends on whether that device actually needs to have um, GMP. And so when you are not sure about whether, I'm sorry, whether it has GMPs. And so if you're not really sure about it, then it's best to, oops, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, the next question. So the next question someone had was concerning how do I determine whether my device is class 1, class 2, or class 3, whether that device would need to have 510K review or not. And that's when you need to have go into FDA's database and actually search to see whether you can find the classification of your device in their database. And then that would tell you what classification your device is. You can also come to Registrar Corp for assistance. That's always the option. Um, so I suggest that you do that if you need help with that as well. And I think um, I might have time for one more question, and we can always respond back to you if you have any further questions. So the next question is, once I receive a notice of action, what should I do? As I stated previously, always look to see what the status of that particular shipment is, and you will know what product within the shipment is actually being detained or reviewed further. And you would also know if there are more than one item in the shipment, you will know what the status of each line item is. So it's always good to review that. And once you review that, then you need to respond to FDA by the respond by date. And there are directions within the notice of action as to what to do in order to respond. If you are still confused, feel free to reach out to Registrar Corp for help. So thank you very much for your time. Hope to be able to give another presentation, which will be a lot more free of technical problems. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye-bye.